Definitely for back in the saddle, this has been a great week. So far, I anticipate it being a great week going forward. Just listened to a great talk by Dr. Linder. So I'm going to try to at least keep up with you, Dr. Linder, on this conversation as well. So here we go. Hopefully you can see my screen. Are you being irrational? Is it just me? So this is a conversation that I do want to have today. And I know that I'm supposed to slow down for the interpreters, but I can't slow down. It's just the way that I talk. So, 180 words a minute. So just try to keep up. We'll skip along here. And I really do want this to be a conversation. So when we're discussing rationality, we're talking about beliefs. So I won't pretend to know all the answers today, and you please don't try to do the same. Stop me whenever you feel like it. I don't want to wait for questions at the end. Just stop me whenever you can. Julie, you're going to have to stop me because I can only see about 3 or 4 people on the screen myself. So if there are any people that raise their hand or ask a question, if you could just chime in when I take a breath. So right now, here is the second one. So I'm talking about rationality today. I'm talking about what's the difference between being rational or reasonable. And it's really up to the people in the belief. So I have different beliefs than you do, I'm sure. We all have different beliefs. But we have to remember too that there's rational and unreasonable people out there as well as irrational or reasonable. So if you're looking at this slide right here, you might believe in some of this stuff, or you might not. So this is where we're coming into being rational and reasonable. So how about this? Have you ever heard or maybe even said some of these things that you see up on the screen? You really have to ask yourself, is life really fair, and what makes it fair? Does it make it fair by everybody agreeing with you about everything? You get to move to the front of the line in everything you do before everyone else? And really, what makes you more rational than everyone else? So this talk is about how we can recognize when we're being irrational ourselves and unreasonable by refusing to even consider the other point of view, in an attempt to show you when you're doing it and show you the people that you're dealing with that might be doing it too. So here you go. This is a picture of a guy taking cattle to market, herding cattle to market. Now, I've been in the cattle business about 50 years myself, started when I was very young, a negative number, in fact. But when you're looking at this right here, what would you think? Would you think that this person is being rational in taking his cattle to market? Yeah. I ask a lot of rhetorical questions, but remember, we're being recorded, so if you do answer, it's going to be recorded. But is this person acting irrational? I would say not. If this has been working for him for 50 years, he's probably working the herd in a rational manner. Wouldn't you think so? I do put these up here. If you're looking for a laugh, you're not going to get it from me, but you can look on the slides and you can get it from the slides here. So how about this? Are you an expert or are you a lawyer? So I've also got about 30 years of experience in banking. I've earned black belts in 3 different martial arts over also 30 years. I've got a fancy piece of paper on the wall here that says that I'm a doctor of business, specifically in behavioral economics, which is a study of why people in identical business settings or environments see the world so differently. In other words, what are they thinking? So I've taken a lot of psych and social classes as well. I normally teach business, research, ethics, finance, economics, and management when not giving HU talks or leading our HLC efforts or serving as the dean of the schools of business, media, arts, and technology, or when serving as the chair of Alta Vista Regional Hospital. So I don't tell you that to try to impress you, but I tell you that because of my experience. And this is going to be important as we go forward here, because experience is something that drives all of our beliefs. So how do we get to be experts in areas? Have you ever seen this Dunning-Kruger effect? For a lot of people, this is how we become experts. And we all start at one side of the scale and we slide to the other side of the scale. So if you are an expert, congratulations, but it took you some time to get there in knowledge and skills and not physical time. So you had a confidence when you first started, and this is what you see in a lot of people right now, is you see people that have a lot of confidence in what they're saying because they've read an article or they were told something, But once again, this is a real study that showed this is how we become experts. And as you become an expert, what you do realize is that the more you know, the less you know, if you understand what I'm saying here. As we're going forward here, as you become more of an expert, you should realize that there's a lot more that you should know that you don't know. All right. So how about this? Are you a lawyer? Maybe you are sometime, or someone you know sometimes acts as a lawyer in thinking. And what does a lawyer do? They take one side of an argument and discuss it. Why? Because they get paid for it. But do you ever stand up for something that you're not getting paid for? The vaccine is good, or the vaccine is bad. Ford or Chevy, the best menudo in town. Politics, religion. And if I disagree with you on anything, are you one of those people that says, okay, here we go? All people have egos. We have pride. We have lines that others cannot cross. And in that case, if you're not like me, then you're against me, right? Well, that takes us to the meat of today's conversation. Any questions so far, Julie? All right, moving forward. So we all have conscious and unconscious biases, and you can read what those are up here on the screen. Conscious bias is intentional. I can't change your mind about your intentional biases. If you're biased against somebody or something or some group intentionally, I can't change your mind. I'm here today to talk really about your unconscious bias or your cognitive bias and how that represents things that are unintentional. So cognitive bias is a subconscious error in thinking that leads you to misinterpret information. So if I were to ask any of you, what is 4% of 50 or what is 80% of 25, could you answer me within 5 seconds? Many of you could, but if I changed it over to this, 50% of 4, could you tell me what 50% of 4 is in 5 seconds? Probably. You could probably tell me what 25% of 80 is in 5 seconds too. So what I'm talking about today is kind of thinking outside the box. This is what they do in math. If you ever get stuck in a math class, try this. Just switch the percentages around and you're going to get the same answer, regardless of what you're doing. Sometimes we have to think outside the box. So that gets us into what I want to talk about today. So cognitive biases that we all have, actor, observer. So here we start with something that we do in most situations. So have you ever told a friend or family member that he or she was in a bad relationship or a horrible job, but were unable to see it in yourselves when we were told that ourselves? Then you could know whether you're the actor or the observer in any of these situations. We can be very critical of others and much more lenient when we're with ourselves. So if you're good at giving advice, maybe you should also be good at taking advice. Of course, what others do with this device or what you do with this device is on them or on you. But when we imitate others only, then we may not be thinking for ourselves. We, of course, feel better when we stand with others because we're not alone, but just remember that that is also how we get judged by others and how we're labeled chiefly by hearsay. Another one is anchoring. Have you ever done this? And the reason that I'm talking about this is because of how this works in the business world. I teach business research classes, and I'm trying to teach my students about how research really works, how this whole situation really works. Have you ever gone out to buy a car, newer used car, and there's a sticker price on the car? So what if I had two cars that I liked? One was $5,000 and one was $6,000, and in my mind they were worth $4,000, and I made an offer for $4,000 on each car. What do you think if one was $5,000, listed at $5,000, one at $6,000? I made a $4,000 offer, and I got, yeah, I'll take your offer on each one of the cars. Which car do you think I would take? Probably the $6,000 car, right? Because I would feel better about it. But what if each one of those cars was only worth $3,000? All right, so this is a tactic that used car salesmen and pretty much anybody uses in selling something. Mark it up and then reduce it down. And you've seen this in a lot of different situations. So we're overly influenced by the first piece of information sometimes that we hear. We have to be mindful of that, acting rational, reasonable. Here's another one, available heuristics. This is kind of how we're hardwired. The probability of something happening based on how many examples readily come to mind. This is, say this is the world that you live in right here, that blue circle. And all the information that you've been able to gather is in that red circle. How could you possibly make a decision based on that? Well, do you listen to other people? Let me give you a hypothetical example. Say that there was an available vaccine for a pandemic. Remember, this is all hypothetical. Can you possibly get all the information for the vaccine to make an informed decision? What if the vaccine was offered in an emergency situation and all the data would not be available for it before you could possibly get the virus? Does hearing a story from someone's brother's, son's friend play an influence in your decision on anything? How about a talking head on TV? Do they influence you in one way or the other? We should always understand, and this is where our experience comes in, that what we know and the source of the information is likely going to be highly influential in what we do. This is where your experience or lack of experience comes in. So do you agree with everything that Trump says? Everything that Biden says? LeBron James, William Shatner, or some YouTube influencer, simply because you don't want to do a little research on your own? Have people become imitators nowadays instead of critical thinkers? Let me ask you a question. Have you stopped beating your wife or husband? If I were to ask you that question, how would you answer it? Lawyers are good at this type of questioning. Some questions can't be answered with a simple yes or no. And in those cases, like that question I just asked you, if you answer at all, be very careful in answering any question that may have a hidden agenda or an ambiguous context. In conducting research, survey questions can lead someone in one direction even when we should be unbiased. Again, in research, being unbiased is a goal, but we should be realistic with ourselves in recognizing that we all have biases. The next one, and this is a big one, is confirmation bias. So if you're a diehard Democrat or Republican, why should you listen to anyone else's view except for those? Or you might say, I only listen to CNN or Fox, and they've never been wrong. I would ask you, right or wrong on what? I would ask your viewpoint. Sound familiar? You and I can believe anything and show you why something is right or wrong by finding things that support my position, my bias. What I or anyone can never do is 100% prove anything to be true. If you may 100% believe something, but I would challenge anyone to 100% prove anything to anyone else. You can believe anything you want, but I do not have to 100% agree with you. Uh-oh, my ride's here. The issue becomes, should I believe anything from anyone I 100% disagree with on one certain issue, or conversely 100% with someone that just because they hold my same opinion on something else? Both can be belief systems that can be dangerous. How about this? Another bias that we have is thinking that the majority is always right. Well, statistically, it usually is. Sometimes we have to do some alternative thinking if we want change or progress. The catch to that is thinking that everyone else is wrong, then why isn't everyone else thinking like we are? So going with the flow is easy, making your own trail is hard. And just remember, getting others to follow us is hard and entails more than just being the loudest voice in the room. If you want to lead, understand that not everyone will follow or agree with you. But you can be sure that if you do not want to lead, then there's going to be no one to follow. So what can you tell me about the first stranger you encountered today or whenever? First impressions are important, but have you ever been wrong about a person? A good person is really bad, or a bad person really good? We're good about placing people into categories at a glance. That's a survival skill left over from a long time ago, when meeting others in far off places may or may not have been, who may or may not have been hostile to us was important. Still useful in some situations, but are you being rational on how you do it? If you were to just wanting to describe to me a university professor, a criminal, a doctor, or whatever, what would they look like to you? Are you being rational and reasonable? Okay, so how many of you have, raise your hand, because this is a good question for that, if you have 2 arms. Because if you have 2 arms, guess what? You're above average. So beware of how data is used, presented, and analyzed. Anybody want to tell me why having 2 arms makes you above average? Julie?
No.
You
raise your hand.
Yeah, think about it. You've got 2 hands and you're above average. That's because there's some people that have less than 1 hand or 2 hands, but there's nobody that's got 3. And most of all, how many of you understand numbers? How long is 1 million seconds? Anybody know how long 1 million seconds is? I'll tell you, 12 days, about 12 days. 1 million seconds is about 12 days. So anybody want to take a shot at how long 1 billion seconds is? "32 years. 32 years. All right. We really don't understand numbers. And for a lot of us, that makes it very difficult to understand what people are telling us when they're using numbers. How about this one? Do you truly understand distances? How long are the white stripes on a city street? Anybody know? You know, on the highway? We drive on every single day. You're out there on the interstate. How long are those stripes? Anybody want to take a guess?
Doesn't it depend on the road?
No, they're all uniform. Should be uniform. I'll say that. Let me say that that way. 12 feet. Each one of them is 12 feet. Most people think they're 2 feet, 5 feet, something like that. All right, moving on. Cognitive biases, hindsight. Have you ever been wrong after the fact? We all have 20/20 hindsight. All right, I knew it would rain at my wedding, during my vacation, for the ball game. I knew my sister-in-law, brother-in-law would do that. We're all great in predicting the future after the fact. So Mike Tyson, I think, said it best: everyone has a plan until I punch them in the face. So if you're always wanting to hit your target, just fire your gun first and then call whatever you hit your target. Otherwise, just accept that occasionally you're going to be wrong, and be brave in both your predictions and in your mea culpas. So how many of us watch the news or social media? Here's a slide that shows you what other people think about those 2 sources, about the rationality of watching a traditional news media or social media. I'm old enough to remember a guy named Walter Cronkite. Does anybody else remember Walter Cronkite? And that's the way it is. All right. Nowadays, most people think that traditional news media is about 60% bias. In social media, forget it, 80% bias. There is no balanced news anymore for a lot of people. There's a lot of inaccuracies and there's a lot of misinformation on some of these studies. So be careful when you're going out there and you're doing your own research, or talking about doing research, or trying to research something on your own, because it's likely that it's biased in one way or another. Once again, remember, confirmation bias. You can find anything and prove anything that you say. But once again, how many people are going to believe it? So here's 20, optimism. I'm an optimist. I believe in optimism. And optimism is great. It allows us to be good, think everything's going to be okay, but not everything is always going to be okay, right? In the martial arts and in life, I have been hit quite a few times in the face, figuratively and literally. But I put myself in those situations. I should have expected most of that to happen. Perhaps you have too, and perhaps you should expect it to happen again if you continually put yourself in those situations. And as I told my bank employees, it's always good to be a little paranoid on security, but don't let it consume you. Life is the same thing. Planning for the worst, but hoping for the best is not a bad plan. And how about this? I can make mistakes and I can still succeed. If I fail 7 out of 10 times in baseball, what's going to happen to me at the plate? If I fail 7 out of 10 times, any baseball fans out there?
You'll have a 300 batting average
And where will I be going? Like
to major leagues.
to the Hall of Fame. All right. You can fail in baseball 7 out of 10 times and still make the Hall of Fame. So we need to give credit for our successes and lead in self-serving biases. Others give credit for our successes, lay blame for failures outside. So once again, you can make mistakes, own up to those. When we say that we didn't make the mistake, like in this cartoon here, we're trying to lay it on somebody else. So we do that because we're trying to look good, but always be sure to give praise to all the people that did the work with you or in spite of you. And so be quick to praise and slow to criticize if you want to appear rational. Here's another one. Anybody know who that is?
A chaplain?
Yeah, Charlie Chaplin. So are you irrational? That's the basis of the stock. I presented some biases. So you can make that determination. And once again, I've gone through this very fast. And maybe you've already thought about a lot of things. Or the people that are around you, are they doing this to you? So are you irrational? Do you believe things that others do not? Do you stand up for what you believe? Do you know 100% of the time that you are right? Then yes, you are irrational to a few, most, or all of the people around you. And the same is true for the people that you 100% disagree with. They are irrational to you. As an individual, we find a lot of people to be irrational unless we 100% believe in what that person, group, or whatever is saying. But that then sometimes just confirms our own biases. So make sure you follow Chaplin's advice here, and I'll wind this up here real quick. So irrationality is in your mind. So the good news of being irrational, having biases, believing in something or someone makes you human. That's the good news. The bad news is that makes you human. None of us are infallible. None of us are all-knowing. So that means that even the irrational, you or me, are neither as good or as bad as we think we are. So this is my enjoy your life, but understand that just as you are not going to make everyone like you, you don't have to like everyone either. Only you should be in your own mind, and don't try to let anybody else take up space up there. And then finally, last slide. For me, just keep doing what you think is right. As long as we do not infringe, impede, or injure others, and if we're still called irrational because of that, just wear it as a badge of honor and do it with some humility and humor, because this would really be a much more boring life, a much more peaceful world if we all believed the same thing. So that's my talk on being irrational, just recognizing it in ourselves and recognizing it in others. I can't change your mind. You can't change my mind. Only you can do it for yourself. So that's my talk on irrationality. If there are anything, and I know I went quick. I know looks like they put the big boss on there. Thank you, Carol Litherland, for for trying to keep up with me. I appreciate it.
So now's the time. If anyone has any questions or suggestions, comments, please feel free to unmute or just put something in the chat if you would prefer. But Yeah, a lot to think about, especially given recent revelations about social media platforms.
Right.
Of which I won't name at this point, but
And I know that, no, I didn't hear the Mike Tyson quote from this past weekend. What did he say?
I don't know, which one was that?
Oh, I don't know. I see it in chat.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. No, this, and in my research class, if you guys want to take my research class, come on, join. It's full this semester, but come join me in my research class. I talk about deep fakes, just what you're talking about, Julie. I talk about that misinformation. I talk about some research. There was a research article that even came out recently talking about some stuff. There's a lot of research out there that's being falsified. Once again, academics fall into that trap as well. Think about it. You spend 6 months of your life researching something just to prove the same thing that everybody else has already proved. Once again, there's not a whole lot of publications that are going to take that type of research. So if you tweak it a little bit and change it a little bit, make it a little bit more unique, then you might have something. But once again, that's falsifying research right there. And there's a lot of people that have gone to jail and lost, credibility because of doing that. So, this is my harping on research state. Once again, if it doesn't impede, if it's not illegal, and it's your belief, one of the beliefs, one of the things that I tell my research class, plagiarism is when you steal the ideas of one person and you attribute it to yourself. When you steal a whole lot of people's ideas and you attribute that to yourself, we call that research. So there's a lot of things to be thinking about.
Dr. Tucker, thank you so much for this presentation. It's so relevant of what we're experiencing today, and it was very refreshing. Has me thinking in a different direction. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Sylvia. That's really what it is. I mean, when I teach a class, that's really what I'm looking for, is for people to kind of say, wait a sec, is there another way of thinking about this? And providing an opportunity, like I said, as a behavioral economic type, I know the numbers inside and out. I can draw you a cash flow in my sleep. But why did those numbers become like those numbers did? Why is the reasoning behind that? Kind of like what Dr. Linder was talking about earlier, Venezuela. Why did they do that type of stuff? It's to me fascinating to crawl inside the human mind. I would love to take a class. Anybody know anybody talking about classes here regarding the mind, using any of the Schrodinger, Damasio, Hume, Kant, Confucius, Descartes, Nietzsche, Vygotsky, Marx, Locke. I'm just doing that to mess with you, Carol.
I think our philosophy classes might be the closest we get into these, delving into these ideas.
Yeah, because once again, we can teach our students all day long how to do something or how to memorize or regurgitate something, but really getting them to do critical thinking, I think, is very important. To think for themselves. I see it, unfortunately, I see it in my kids too. They're being homeschooled right now, but so they have access to the internet pretty much all day. And so I'll come home and they'll have some tidbit of information that they've discovered today, and they'll throw that at me, and I'm like, where, even the question is ridiculous. Where did you hear that? It's on the internet. And so I said, are you sure that's true? And they're like, it's on the internet. That doesn't tell me that is the gold standard of where to get information. All right. So once again, we can't know all the information. Just taking the vaccine As an example, once again, we can't know what the vaccine will do to us, but we can know what is happening. And we talk about this all the time, what is happening with unvaccinated people and how they're in the hospital and how they're dying. People with vaccines still die. I understand that. But if you look at the numbers between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, you can see that, well, maybe we need to do a little more research before we just dismiss this vaccine offhand. That's, Brandon will be happy I said that, right, Sylvia?
Yes, he will, amongst others as well.
Okay. All right, so rationality, once again, it's your belief. It's what you think. I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change mine. But is it reasonable or is it being unreasonable? Once again, there could be some people on here that believe that we have not been to the moon. My wife would tell you that we have not been to the moon. We, the US, has not been to the moon because she's Russian. She's first generation Russian. I'm third generation. But she would say first generation Russians would tell you that the US never made it to the moon. That's Hollywood. Once again, is she being rational or irrational? Is she being reasonable or unreasonable? Can we 100% prove it? I remember I saw it in Mrs. Osborne's first grade class on a 10-inch black and white TV in 1969. And so that, if you do the math, you can figure out that I'm 35 years old. But in 1969, I saw it happen. Do I believe my own eyes? Or do I listen to what other people tell me? So once again, where did those numbers come from? Why did those people make those decisions? Why, when I was a banker, did somebody come in and want to borrow $40,000, buy a car, and pay me 18% interest on a loan to borrow the money when they had $100,000 in the bank that they were earning 2% on? Why would someone want to do that? Can you see why I would question them and go, why do you want to borrow the money at 18% when you've got it in the bank at 2%? Why don't you just take it out of the bank and buy the car instead of paying me 18%? Trying to save people sometimes from decisions that don't make a whole lot of sense until they explain to me why they thought that was the reasonable answer. Well, as Forrest Gump said, that's all I've got to say on that. I appreciate it. Thank you again, Julie. Thank you, everybody that listened to me today. Hopefully you're not too far asleep. And so I appreciate that. And I do look forward to doing this again if you're doing it, Julie, next year. My research is on Richard Thaler, the Nobel Prize winner on economics, on his nudge theory. So if you have ever heard of the nudge theory, my research is on that, also on something called design thinking, and those two topics.